Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Big updates for Ferrari and especially Lewis Hamilton with all the theories over the last few weeks as to what their preparation looks like for 2026. It seems things are going rather smoothly since the decision to axe all of their further changes to the SF25. The 2026 car is the only machine in the wind tunnel with major revisions to that car expected, and Fred Vasseur expected to stay in charge at the bare minimum through this new rule cycle. Lots of other drama on the day as well. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks for all the recent support as well over the last few days. We have a Grand Prix in the coming days. We also have Audi arriving on the grid next year. Now, well, it's Sauber, but it's going to become Audi. They are having a sponsorship, it seems, from Revolut, so this potentially could be a pretty big deal. This may well be the title sponsor of that team. We know that title sponsors are becoming an increasingly popular thing in Formula 1 because there's plenty of money to be had by doing so, and to be fair, organisations and corporations willing to get involved. Now, one of the other big rumours of the day is around the Cadillac seat, or maybe another seat. Now, this guy, Bobby Parsons, I will just firstly say, I have no idea if this account has any sort of validity. He's not really got that many followers. He just tweets about, stuff and maybe occasionally gets stuff right, maybe occasionally gets stuff wrong. He tweeted about Verstappen saying around at the start of July, so I don't know, take it as you will. And, end of June, talked about Lindblad. So, it is what it is. What I will say is, Bobby Parsons says, whoever this account is, so take it with a mega pinch of salt, but it's nonetheless interesting to discuss. A Formula 2 champion will finally get his full-time opportunity. So, which Formula 2 champion could this refer to? Well, it can't be Piastri, because he's maybe going to win the World Championship this year. It can't be Bortoleto, because he's already on the grid. So, who are our other options? Realistically, we've got Théo Pourchaire, and we've got Felipe Drugovich, the two other most recent Formula 2 champions. If we look back at the winners over the last few years, Charles Leclerc, we know what he's doing. George Russell, we know what he was doing. Nick de Vries got his chance, right? Mick Schumacher arguably got his chance as well. So, there's only a couple of other opportunities here, and those are for the names that we just discussed. So, what does that potentially look like, right? Is it especially likely for Pourchaire? I think that's less likely. It may be, if anyone, to do with Drugovich. Now, this is pretty interesting because today, I think actually this clearly isn't today, it says 6 days ago, but I saw this today anyway, people talking about that Drugovich has got another sponsor, basically. So it's just something to keep in mind. There is, we think, talk between Cadillac to get potentially the likes of a Bottas, maybe a Perez, maybe both. But the rumours have actually moved on to some degree today, with there being a feeling that they're actually more interested in some younger drivers. There's talk about Jack Crawford, potentially looking at Cadillac, maybe Aston Martin. Alonso's contract with Aston is done after, I think, 26, and more than likely next year will be Alonso's last season. He's going to see how it goes in the new car. If he can win the championship or at least try and contend for it, that would be mega. If it doesn't happen, he's going to be like 45. You'd think he probably calls it a day. And maybe Lance Stroll will as well, or should just go to the World Endurance Championship anyway. So there are options out there for Aston. I'm sure they want to get Max as well after the upcoming season. And then Cadillac still need a couple of seats to fill. Bottas feels confident that's going to happen, but there are now new reports that actually they are looking for a younger driver, which does make some degree of sense, right? It's understandable that you would want to pair a more inexperienced driver with a more experienced. Like if Cadillac turn up with Bottas Perez, okay, great, right? But it's not really setting the world alight, and, it might make sense to give it to a younger driver who has, let's say, backing from the right areas. There's talk about Zhou Guanyu even, just because he's got the Chinese piece that General Motors might rather like. But it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do that. So my current feeling is that they seem quite likely to choose between Bottas and Perez. Now, you might go for, Perez and Drugovich would be very interesting. One from Brazil, one from, obviously, Mexico. That could be very intriguing for that region. But equally, if I was to choose one of Bottas or Perez, I'm probably taking Bottas, and then I'm picking another one. But it seems like, even in the replies here, right, people are saying Crawford, Drugovich, Schumacher, like, what are the options? Of these options, I don't know, am I taking Drugovich? Maybe I am. I'm not so sure, really. I'm intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comment section below on what you would do if those were the options, but just to keep in mind that Cadillac, it seems, are making moves, and potentially Drugovich, based on these discussions here, could be in play. Pourchaire is maybe, just feels to me a little bit less likely. He, won it not at the first time of asking. Of course, neither did Drugovich. But I just think that if they are going to bring in a younger driver, it's probably going to be a driver with some backing and, let's say who can be a serious commercial asset to the team. And I think that Drugovich would probably tick that box more than Pourchaire would. Now, Russell, we're pretty sure is going to sign a multi-year deal with Mercedes. We saw Sky Sports F1 talk about it yesterday. Today, we've got Planet F1 saying that, yeah, Russell's going to sign a new multi-year deal with the team, and that's going to be locked in the very near future. What does it mean for Antonelli? I think this is a big question as of late, because Antonelli has struggled hard in the last few rounds, barely scored any points at all, and obviously a large part of that is his fault. Some of it was engine issues and, mistakes that were made. Monaco he pushed a bit too hard, ended up putting it in the wall, but it's not like Russell did well there either. We also know that the car's exploded on occasion and, he's had some technical gremlins, but he's not been especially quick, especially since Spain, when some changes to the front wing were made, and it feels like Mercedes have taken a turn in the wrong direction, right? And that's what Mercedes have been talking about. Feels like Mercedes have to go back to the drawing board to some degree to figure out why the direction they took, especially since Spain. And of course there was Canada where they won very impressively, but as we've said before, that's a very unique circuit in many ways that has historically suited Mercedes rather well. Russell was on pole there, of course, the year before as well. But for every other circuit, it seems like they've taken things down seriously the wrong path, and as a result there has been some talk about Antonelli, whether it was too early to put him in the Mercedes, whether he should have gone to another team instead. I will just quickly say, when it comes to Drugovich and those discussions, it might not just be Cadillac, by the way. There is also something to be said about Alpine, because they're going to Mercedes Power. We know that Bottas has potentially some interest from Alpine as well. Flavio Briatore, he might do whatever, right? You can never predict what this guy's going to do next. But there was talk about maybe Antonelli to Alpine or something like that could actually make some sense. Like, let's say hypothetically, Max was to come to Mercedes and Russell was doing so well that you couldn't get rid of him, and Antonelli's been the one underperforming. Do you say to Kimi, okay, look, we're going to put you at Alpine for a year or two, then you can come back when you kind of learn your trade as other drivers have done? I think in the long term, this is going to be for the best. I mean, if you look at Max Verstappen when he first came in, when he was 17, 18, he was making mistakes left, right, rhubarb. Obviously, he showed maybe more glimmers than Antonelli has so far, but, expecting him to only get faster. It does feel though right now he is suffering a bit of a crisis of confidence, and to Max's credit, I think with like his upbringing and other factors, Max never really had an issue with lack of confidence. James Allison has a few words for Antonelli and says, "We tell him, and it's demonstrably a fact, that we have taken the wrong steps with the car, making our team less competitive, and he is paying the price for that, as is George. It is utterly clear to all of us that the thing we need to do is make the car better, and then Kimi's fortunes will reverse with that. And hopefully he's listening to us as we say those reassuring words, because we absolutely know that he is putting into the effort on his side of the bargain." Like, let's not forget the brilliant podium in Canada, and also the unbelievable sprint pole back in Miami. The ability is certainly in there, but Mercedes right now they've developed their car in a way that makes it much more challenging to drive. George is struggling with it, making more mistakes. We saw some of that in Silverstone, and it's affecting Antonelli even more, which is probably to be expected. So that's the piece on Antonelli. Talking to 2026 though, because it's a big discussion with Mercedes, with Ferrari and elsewhere. This is an interesting comment that came out today. According to paddock sources, during the Belgian Grand Prix weekends, one major power unit supplier has already informed its customers that the prices will double compared to the current costs. So let's have a quick think as to who that might be, right? Because there are only a couple of PU suppliers that this could apply to. First of all, because it says it's customers. So, okay, who makes the power units? Not Renault anymore. Audi, they're doing their own thing. Red Bull Powertrains, they're doing their own thing. But as we know, Audi are just doing it for their team. Honda are coming in just for Aston Martin, as we know. Red Bull Powertrains is just Red Bull and presumably Racing Bulls. So there's only two manufacturers for which this could make sense. One is Ferrari, because Ferrari are going to have their own engine. They are going to have the engine for Haas, and then they're also supplying Cadillac for the next couple of years as well. So it could be Ferrari or it could be Mercedes. We know that they've got plenty of customers. McLaren used to be Aston, but now it's going to be Alpine, and then Williams to kind of close out the lot. But those are the options, right? And this is the thing. The new engines are far more complicated than than they have been before. And the cost is a factor, right? I mean, it is a factor in the longevity of this engine program. If the teams are getting told, yeah, these engines are going to cost twice what they used to, that's not really a ringing endorsement of this era of regulations. Maybe that will come down over time, but it is a big talking point, especially when you've got the likes of Mohammed Ben Sulayem saying, look, for 2028, 29, as soon as we can, we're going to try and put V8s back in the car, maybe with turbos, maybe with a little 5% hybrid unit to keep some of the power unit suppliers happy. But this does not, on first glance, seem especially like a good idea or especially sustainable. But let's talk Ferrari, because it was an up and down weekend for them. In many respects, it was actually much more competitive. Hamilton was really fast on the Sunday after making the changes. Unfortunately for him, because of the rain there was less rain than they expected because the stewards didn't go racing for a while. Hamilton's progress was somewhat stalled, and he also had to do so much fuel saving because his car in the dry was simply burning too much fuel to even get to the end of the Grand Prix. So that was an issue, and of course the mistake on the Saturday and even on the Friday when he was getting used to the new brake pads, that cost him in the qualifying, but he had the pace on the Sunday, and Leclerc had good pace as well. Was he faster than Max? Not seemingly anyway, but he was fast enough to hold him off. And to be fair, given the McLarens are both pushing very hard, I mean, Lando was clearly pushing very hard to try and catch up to Piastri, it's not like Leclerc was miles behind. It wasn't great, but it's not like the McLarens were lapping a second and a half a lap quicker than anybody else. They were lapping a good chunk of tenths, but it wasn't absolutely embarrassing. And Leclerc came out of the weekend saying, yeah, the upgrades have actually worked. It's just, unfortunately, McLaren are still a little bit built different. But there is a feeling that on certain tracks from now to the end of the year, maybe Ferrari can give it a go. But yeah, that's a positive potentially. There's also maybe some positives to take into future races as well, especially 2026. Just one thing to note, I don't know if you guys noticed this during the weekend, but they put the drivers' names on the side of the T-cam, but I don't really think that anyone is actually able to spot that in real time unless you've got a still image like this. And if anything, it makes it even worse, because if I'm looking at that from the side, I'm seeing a little bit of black on the T-cam. So I might even start to think, well, actually, is that even the yellow T-cam, or is that the other T-cam? I think no Formula 1 fan is figuring out whether this is Hamilton or Leclerc because it says Ham on the side here. You're looking at the number, you're looking at the colour of the helmet, and typically the colour of the T-cam. Whatever, that's an aside. But currently, the only car that Ferrari are trying in the wind tunnel is, of course, now the 2026 car. They cancelled a further floor update for the SF25, recognising that even if that did help them, it wasn't going to make a difference in the context of the season because the championship is long dead in both regards. So as a result, everything now is going into 2026. Hamilton has wanted this, he's pushed for this for quite some time, and now it seems like he's finally getting his way. According to reports, there's a strong focus on the chassis and a revolution in the suspension design. This is what Auto Racers said in their article, that they're spending a lot of time right now on the development of the chassis and the suspensions. So they are predicting that potentially a major overhaul again to the suspension design of next year's Ferrari is going to be coming. Whether that's a good or a bad idea, we'll see, but we know that suspension has been the key topic when it comes to aerodynamics over the last few years, and of course mechanical platform in this ground effect era, and it seems that Ferrari have their ideas on what they want to do next year and are putting all of their effort into that, as did famously Adrian Newey when he designed the full suspension for the 2022 Red Bull, which has practically stayed the same across the grid and has become the standard over the last 4 years. This is another big update, though, in terms of what Hamilton wanted to see, as in focus on 2026, and as Hamilton and Leclerc, and seemingly the team made very clear, Fred Vasseur sticking around. We know that Vigna, John Elkann, they were turning up at the team, and there was a feeling that they were pretty happy with the fact that a team was aligned behind Fred Vasseur. Yeah, the results haven't delivered what Ferrari wanted, and their man who's leading up the World Endurance Championship Series at Ferrari right now is clearly, doing a good job. Ferrari are doing very well over there, although there's some talk as always about balance of performance and where exactly all that lies. But the team is very much behind Vasseur. I think the fans are very much behind Vasseur, and as much as his comments sometimes do frustrate me from the outside looking in, it does feel like even if he isn't the man for the job, getting rid of him is a death sentence. Because if you get rid of him now going into next year, try and rebuild the whole operation, knowing how political Ferrari is, it's all a recipe for disaster. There was a rumour that they're going to try and put somebody else on board between Vasseur and the top management to help the communication. Whether that's a good idea, I'm personally not so convinced. I think Vasseur should be given more control in the same way that Horner was trying to get more control out of Red Bull, and it probably led to his sacking. Martin Brundle was saying that he thinks Horner somewhat overplayed his hand over the last couple of years. And if Vasseur overplays his hand, he gets sacked. Now, Vasseur was making some very strong comments, right? I mean, you guys remember the comments he made a few rounds ago, back in like Canada time, when he was saying, oh, we've changed the drivers, we've changed the team principle, you know, we've changed some of the strategy people or whatever, and like the results are the same. So we've got new engineers, so whose fault is that type thing, kind of implying that the way the structure of the team is from the top down is an issue. And I thought that was the comment of a man who was either convinced he was getting sacked or was actually really convinced that he was going to stay so he could say what he wanted. The reality is that Hamilton and Leclerc, both of their drivers, would not have been happy if Vasseur was axed, and according to the latest rumours, he is at least going to stay. We know that his contract ends at the end of this season. Rumour has it they're at least going to keep him around for one more year. So very much into your thoughts in the comments. Vasseur's talking about a few things, although you read lots of these comments and you just think that some of it's just GPT generated. So we'll just move on from that, because I wanted to talk, before we close out the video, about the Hungarian Grand Prix coming up in a couple of days' time. Last year, this was a scene of a rather dramatic circumstance. Lando, well, of course, had the undercut. He got ahead of Piastri. That was McLaren's mistake, if you want to look at it from that perspective. And then, as we know, he was forced by verbal blackmail to give up the lead after clearly showing that he had more pace. It's been a good circuit for Lando historically, a very good circuit, in the same way that Spa has been a good circuit for Piastri. So in the same way that Piastri took back the championship lead, I'm, expecting, and frankly, I think we need to see, for the context of the championship, Lando win in Hungary, because if we don't, I think, Piastri becomes an even stronger favourite in the championship than he already is. But you can tell me for sure that if the same circumstance as last year was to happen again, which I'm sure McLaren would try and avoid, but if it was to happen again, you think there's any world where Lando is giving up the win to his teammate? Absolutely not. It's a different set of circumstances here 12 months down the line. And if he did do that, then, as I've sort of said before, get this guy out of my sport, right? Like, I don't want drivers, at least in the competition for the championship, who don't have that kind of mentality, because you know for sure that Piastri would be doing it the other way around. Maiden wins in Hungary. Piastri was one of them, right? Actually, the second driver for McLaren to do so after Kovalainen won there back in 2008. And just to quickly look at the weather report, we did this last week, so we're going to do it again. On Friday, for practice, it looks relatively clean. On Saturday, there is a chance of rain towards the early part of the day, but, by the time qualifying comes around, it's still possible, but by no means guaranteed. The more likely day to potentially get affected again appears to be the Sunday, with a decent chance of some rain happening again. Now, are we going to get a Spa repeat? I don't think so. I think the nature of Spa, from multiple angles, makes it just more challenging to race there in the wet than maybe one would like. But we do know that the stewards are being a little bit more cautious about this stuff. So, I'm hoping that we get a situation where maybe it starts dry, then it rains, then eventually it dries up, maybe it rains again at the ends. That wouldn't be too bad, would it, right? At least then you're actually going to go racing. When it rains before the race begins, then it's like, oh, the visibility's so bad and we can't use the full wet tyres, and you guys know how it goes from there. But if it starts raining once the race is already on, then usually you get away with it, as to some extent we did back in Silverstone. So very much into your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.